Greetings, class, and welcome to Chapter 20, Viruses and Prokaryotes. In this unit, we're going to study first viruses as kind of like a segue from what we talked about in the last unit. As something that's really not quite alive, but does share some of the characteristics of living things. And then we're going to move into our first group of living things, which are the bacterium. So let's start first with the virus. I like this quote here, that's why I included it in the presentation. The single biggest threat to man's continued dominance on the planet is a virus. It's pretty scary, isn't it, when you think about it? Viruses so tiny need to be magnified hundreds of thousands of times just to see them. Something so small can be so powerful and so dangerous. It's pretty scary when you think about it. The word virus actually literally means poison, which will tell you pretty much everything you need to know about it right away. One of the earliest historical discoveries of a virus is attributed to Dmitry Ivanovsky. He first discovered the tobacco mosaic virus in the late part of the 19th century. Of course, you couldn't see viruses back then because they didn't have the microscopes powerful enough to see them. But he knew something was there in the juice that he extracted from these infected plants. It would take a few decades more before scientists could actually see them through the advent of the electron microscope. So what is a virus? Viruses, pretty simply, are non-living particles. They have some of the characteristic things of life, like, for example, they reproduce, but they can't even reproduce on their own. They actually need a host cell for that. They don't respond to stimuli. They don't move on their own. They don't use energy. They're just basically a particle that contains some type of genetic information and a protein coat, or what's also known as a capsid. They can affect just about any living thing, plants, animals, bacteria, it doesn't matter. If it's a living thing, it can be infected by a virus. You can see this typical virus here, the genetic information on the inside, capsid on the outside. The genetic information is designed to pass on to the host cell to facilitate the production of baby viruses. And the capsid, or protein coat on the outside, is designed almost as a Trojan horse to trick the cell, the host cell, into inviting the virus into it. The protein coat can adhere to the surface of the cell and allow insertion to take place. Here's some examples of some different viruses, and no matter what it looks like, you can see the genetic information and the capsid. This ape here. These are electron microscope images, magnified hundreds of thousands of times. And when classifying viruses, they can fit into either of two categories, depending on how they infect the host organism. Lytic viruses, or active viruses, are viruses that attach to the host cell and immediately take over the operation. And then lysogenic viruses, or hidden or latent viruses, which you'll see on the next slide. A lytic virus attaches to the host cell. As you can see here in the first image, they will insert their genetic information into the host cell. Once that occurs, the virus will basically, for all intents and purposes, immediately take over all the function of the cell. And all the things the cell used to do for itself now goes towards the production of virus parts, which are then assembled into new baby viruses. And once the cell is full of viruses, kind of like if you were blowing air into a balloon, eventually the balloon will rupture. Same thing happens to the cell. What will happen is the cell will lyse or rupture it, releasing all those hundreds of viruses. Now, the scary part about that is all those teeny tiny viruses now go on to infect cells themselves. So you can kind of imagine how easy it would be to feel fine in the morning, be exposed to something like a virus, like the flu or a cold, and then by the end of the day you feel terrible. Just think about all those viruses reproducing over and over again, attacking more and more cells. So a lytic virus, again, is an active virus, one that actually takes over the operation of the cell right away. Compare that with a lysogenic virus, or a latent virus, or what sometimes they call a hidden virus. These viruses are more dangerous and insidious because what happens in these viruses is they have a dormant phase. What they'll do is, similar to an active virus, is they'll attach to the host cell and insert their genetic material. But when they insert their genetic material, what happens instead is the genetic material becomes part of the host cell's DNA. In a very rudimentary and ancient form of genetic engineering, that piece of DNA is now incorporated into the host cell's DNA, something we call a prophage, or also sometimes referred to as a provirus. And what happens is every time the cell reproduces, that bit of DNA is also copied in the daughter cells, as you can see in these daughter cells here, and it's passed on generation after generation. So the cell goes about its normal business pretty much unaware that this has been inserted into its DNA. And it could last for years, in this case, hidden from the host cell. That's what makes it very dangerous. Viruses like HIV, for example, especially insidious because people could be infected with the HIV virus, which is lysogenic, and not realize that they are infected with it because they exhibit no symptoms from years. And then for some reason, whatever may occur, poor nutrition, exhaustion, stress, whatever, some type of environmental factor will trigger the virus to wake up. And at that particular point, it will go lytic and become active. Other examples include chickenpox later in life when it reappears, shingles, cold sores, the herpes simplex virus. These are some examples of hidden viruses that stay dormant for a long period of time and then become active. Now, some interesting things about viruses. Viruses are usually pretty species specific in that they like to infect certain species of organisms. That's not 100% true. Some viruses will attack a few species. Some viruses do cross species, like that's one of the hypotheses of the origins of HIV that actually was transferred perhaps through a bite from a chimpanzee or monkey, a virus form called the simian immunodeficiency virus, or SIV, and then it was transferred to a human, became HIV. But a lot of viruses are very species specific, and viruses are also cell specific, which means they attack certain types of cells, which makes sense because you have the protein codes, which are recognized by only certain types of cells. Like, for example, the flu likes to infect the respiratory tract, chickenpox nerve endings. The HIV virus attacks the cells of the immune system. So, like, if someone coughs on your foot, you're not going to get the flu of the toes. Those flu virus particles will have to get inhaled or ingested and end up in your respiratory tract for you to develop the flu, which doesn't mean you couldn't touch your foot or rub it and then maybe eat some food later or rub your nose or your cheek or something like that, and then the particles end up in that way. But viruses traditionally are species specific and cell specific. Now, some viruses are actually what we call retroviruses. And retro, of course, means reverse or backwards. And a retrovirus is a virus that instead of having a core of DNA, has a core of RNA. And what that allows the cell to do is to take that RNA information and actually direct it to assemble DNA, new DNA, going towards the assembly of the new proteins. HIV is an example of a retrovirus. Here's some examples of diseases that I'm sure everybody's familiar with. Chickenpox, hepatitis, the cold, influenza. All these are examples of diseases caused by viruses. Now, how are viruses treated? Viruses are primarily treated with bed rest, a little chicken soup, plenty of fluids, that kind of stuff. Rest is the primary treatment for viruses. Going to the doctor, complaining enough to walk away with antibiotics is not a treatment for viruses. Viruses do not respond to antibiotics. After all, viruses are not living, so they can't be killed in normal medical ways. The body needs to do that. The body has specialized cells that are designed to digest and destroy viruses. So the body actually needs to do the work. So rest is one of the key components to treating a virus. Resting so your body can concentrate all its energy and resources on defeating the virus. Now, scientists have come up with some methods to prevent viruses, i.e. vaccinations. The first vaccine was devised by Edward Jenner. That was for smallpox. And basically what a vaccine is a weakened or dead version of the virus that's injected into your body. And what it does is it tricks the body to respond. And the body's response includes the production of antibodies, which learn how to destroy the virus. And once those antibodies are created, they remain in your body for years. So if you're ever exposed to that virus again, the body will know how to destroy it. Now, of course, you do need booster shots from time to time as the antibodies do start to disappear. And some viruses are especially scary, like, for example, the flu and stuff. They can actually mutate and change from year to year. That's why things like the flu, you have to get the vaccine every year. But vaccines are a great method of prevention so that you don't actually develop the virus. There are some examples of antiviral drugs for some viruses, like, for example, Tamiflu for the flu, and they help to slow down the process of viral reproduction so your body can get the upper hand in treatment. Now, a couple of special cases I just want to touch upon, in aside to viruses. There are some types of pathogens that aren't even really a virus. Like, for example, a viroid, which basically is just a naked piece of RNA that can affect things like plant cells and affect metabolic processes. Prions, these are clumps of protein that can affect like the production of normal proteins. And a great example of this is mad cow disease, and which you can see the brain here, how it looks normally, and after the development of mad cow disease. You can see this picture here of a cow. This was actually a very serious situation. I think it was in the late 80s, early 90s, especially in Western Europe. They had a huge outbreak of mad cow disease. And some cows, some countries, basically you couldn't buy beef, maybe sliced beef like steaks and stuff, but ground beef was pretty much off limits because a lot of times ground beef will include nerve material and things like that, the ground up in it, and that's where you find the prions that cause mad cow disease. So at this point, we're going to stop part one. And when we get into part two, we're going to look at our first living things, which are bacteria. Bacteria have a bad reputation sometimes as well, like viruses, but it's not deserving because many bacteria are inconsequential to us or beneficial to us. In fact, life wouldn't be possible on Earth without bacteria. So that concludes part one.